Well, cozy season has arrived. That wonderful but slightly chaotic time of year where I try to stay calm by keeping my hands busy and the house smelling of soup and sanity. Because while I admire those who glide gracefully into Christmas, I myself tend to tumble, usually covered in flour and some sort of paint. We also have a November birthday in the house, so this week I'm just keeping it simple. A nice warming crock pot full of minestrone, some homemade bread, and some hand-painted gift tags. But before I get into any of that, I owe you all an update on the Victorian bookcases in the big room. As a recap, I painted this beautiful blue in the big room and then decided I was going to strip the bookcases. As you can see on this back wall, I've gotten 2 of the 3 sections done, and I have to say it was absolutely the right decision to strip these back. I will need this. So this is taking much longer than I thought it would, and I knew it would take a long time, but unfortunately I just can't sit in here every day and just work on these bookcases. But I want to get this section at least done before Christmas, so I'm hoping another 2 weeks, and that way I can put this room back together for Christmas, because I can't do anything right now. Now, the other side of the room has 3 more bookcases in a corner. Those I will probably save till January and February, and that will be a project in January and February. But I might even push it back farther, because with all of the paint strippers, I have to have all the windows open, which is not very energy efficient, but it is a necessity. So that might just wait till the spring. The wood is in like such good condition, actually. And the first few layers of paint have come off really easy, but there is one layer of blue lead paint that was probably painted 100, 150 years ago that is extremely difficult. It needs a lot of scrubbing and it needs a lot of paint thinner. And actually, there is nowhere near us that sells it, so I have to drive into Glasgow to get some. So that's what I'm waiting on right now, is the chance to drive into Glasgow and get some more. Now, I have ordered some cling strip as well, which is supposed to be really good. And I did use it for the bottom 2 shelves, and it was good, but it was extremely messy. But at this point, I think it just being faster, I can deal with the mess in order to get this kind of moving along. But anyway, that is what is going on with the big room. So it took me 1 day to paint the walls of this room, and it has taken me over a month. Still, I do not regret this decision. This is the right decision. These are going to be beautiful. So it's very hard for me to film actually stripping the bookcases because I'm wearing a lot of protective gear, and I don't want to get that on my phone. It has been rainy and dreary for days, and it is definitely soup weather, and I haven't made soup in a really, really long time. My husband and I, our favorite soup is minestrone, so I'm going to make some minestrone this week, but I'm going to use up some of the dried cannellini beans I already have, which means I need to soak them the day before. I don't know if you do meal prep. I don't do meal prep per se, but because my daughter has activities after school and so does my son, I kind of juggle which meals I'm going to make on which days. So tomorrow, everybody's in different directions. So it's a great day for a crock pot meal. So I'll make the soup for tomorrow, which means I just need to soak the beans overnight, but it's the morning and I operate better in the mornings and I remember to do things better in the morning. So we're going to let them sit for a full 24 hours.
All right, these are soaked overnight, a little bit longer than that. They've soaked since yesterday morning. But I need to cook the beans first before I make the soup. Now, do you have to go through all these extra steps? No. I didn't have any canned cannellini beans, and I had dried ones. Also, I'm making a lot because my husband and I actually like to have beans for breakfast sometimes, and I put beans in my salad. So I'm not going to put all of them in the soup. I'm going to set some aside for whatever I need it for during the week.
Whenever I make beans, I start out with a little pancetta or some smoked lardons in the bottom of the pot, just to give it some background flavor. Drain the beans and give them a good rinse. Add that to the pancetta and then cover with water. I also add an onion and a stock cube. Bring that up to a boil and then remove it from the high heat and let it simmer for about 45 minutes.
You'll notice I am wearing a microphone because I got lots of comments that I talk too softly. But instead of having to yell across the room at the camera, I figured I would just invest in this. So, minestrone. Now, my husband and I have an ongoing discussion about soup. For me, a soup is kind of chunky and hearty vegetables and big chunks of meat, served in a broth. And that's how I see soup. Whereas he tends to view soup as something that's pureed, like a tomato soup or a carrot and coriander soup, that's served with some crusty bread. But one soup we both agree on is minestrone, and we all love it. Vegetables are always a good idea, and this is a great way to throw in whatever you have. I'm not really following a recipe because I've made this before, but I will show you how I do it. But honestly, with minestrone, anything goes. You'll get people on the internet that will tell you follow this recipe, but this is minestrone coated. How is that? Does that make everyone happy?
We're going to start out with sofrito, which is the holy trinity of Italian cooking: carrots, celery, and onions. Most recipes online call for pancetta, but I am using smoked lardons. While that's cooking down, let's chop some vegetables. You can use any vegetables you have. Minestrone basically means big soup. I do always use carrots and cabbage in my soup. Those are kind of my staples. Today, I am also adding some kale, just for some extra vitamins. I've also got some bigger chunks of celery and some courgettes. Once the sofrito is cooked down, I'm going to add it straight to the crock pot. From there, it's just assembly. I'm going to add the beans and plenty of the bean water. A generous helping of tomato paste, that's probably about 2 tablespoons. Actually, probably 3. And all of the beautiful vegetables we just chopped. Then I add 2 cans of tinned tomatoes. Now, normally you would add small pasta, but I have this jar of leftover pasta, and this is what I use when I make minestrone. I just use everything up. Add water, then just let it simmer until you're ready to eat. Now, let's try to make some bread to go with dinner.
I thought I would try my hand at making bread, but I have picked the most difficult, impossible recipe I possibly could have. And I went to the store and I bought what I thought I needed and not the things I thought I had. And that didn't turn out so well. So I'm going to make whole grain bread with mostly white flour because we have the 30% whole grain, but I could have sworn that it was just a bag of just full grain flour. Anyway, it also calls for like cooked bulgur wheat and all of these different seeds. And so I got home and I didn't realize it needed to be cooked. So now, along with cooking the beans, I'm having to cook the bulgur wheat. However, we'll see how this turns out. The first thing we have to do is bloom the yeast. And this recipe calls for 2 packets because whole grain bread is a bit thicker, so it needs a little bit more help. This is half a cup of warm water, not hot, but warm. And then we're going to add 2 teaspoons of honey. We whisk that together. Let it sit for about 5 minutes. We do this to make sure the yeast is alive. And you can tell it's alive when it starts forming little bubbles. So while the yeast is proving, I am going to mix the flours together. 2 tablespoons of salt, and then give it a good mix together. Look how beautiful that has risen. I've buttered this bowl. I've added the yeast in. I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of butter. This is unsalted butter. And then 3 tablespoons of honey. So I've just mixed in 3 cups of the flour mixture. We're going to mix that on low. And then when that's all mixed in, I will add all of the extras, and then we'll slowly add in the other flours.
When the dough doesn't touch the sides, it's ready to be turned out. Then it needs to be kneaded for another 5 minutes. Honestly, this is the most involved bread recipe I have ever seen. You want the dough tacky, but it should be able to spring back. When it's ready, transfer it to a buttered bowl, cover with plastic, and leave to rise until it's doubled in size.
I'd say that's about doubled in size. I can't believe it actually rose. I'm surprised. So I'm supposed to turn this out and divide it in half. I don't have one of those fancy bread thingies. Oh my gosh, this bowl is so heavy. Pardon me while I just do some bicep curls. I've buttered my bread tins, but I don't have 2 the same size, so we'll have to think of what to do with the rest of the dough. It says to punch the dough down. Oh, it did! There we go. Now I'm supposed to shape it into a rectangle about the size of the pan. And then I'm supposed to fold it in on itself, like so, and set it to rise in the pan. This needs to rise again, but I have to go take my daughter to dance soon, so it will get more rising time than it probably should, but hopefully that doesn't hurt it.
I left these for about 3 hours. Now we need to add an egg wash, some extra seeds, and put them in the oven. The recipe calls for a 400-degree oven, that's Fahrenheit, and 45 minutes. I had extra dough, so I turned them into some rolls. Is it burnt or is it artisanal?
No, you can't have the bread. I'll have to feed you something else.
I could have added more water to it, but after dance, my daughter was hungry, so we left it nice, thick, and hearty. So while we're pushing the boundaries of what you could call soup, it was still delicious.
You're welcome, baby. Today, I'm going to be hand painting some gift tags. I'm going to do it in a batch, so I'm going to break up this piece of paper with some washi tape, and that way I'm not faced with a big blank page. Now, this is something you could do in front of the TV or while you're doing something else, because each element needs to dry before you add something else. I'm using gouache today, but you could use watercolor, you could use acrylic. What I'm showing you isn't kind of paint specific, so don't let that stop you if you don't have what I have. If you don't have tape, you can always just get a pen and a ruler to mark out the grid. Now, all of these are going to look a little bit different, and that's kind of the point. You can see how even following the same idea kind of results in something different.
Could I have my paper back, please? So I'll be speeding the video up because, full disclosure, it does take about half an hour to do these. I'm adding a very watery pink, and that is actually going to be the sky. You want the watery color variations to give it some texture. I even accidentally dipped my brush into the orange, but you know what? I just went with it. Now we're going to make some mountains in the background. These are also going to be a little bit watery, but they're going to be an aqua or a light blue. Here, I'm actually mixing those two colors together just to give it a little variation. While it's still wet, go ahead and pull the sides of those mountains into the center of the page to look like they're going into the water. Once those are completely dry, we can use a dark green to start making the trees. I start at the bottom by making a back and forth motion, and then I draw a line upward and just fill it in with the same back and forth motion. You want the trees taller on the outside and shorter as you move in. Add a line of light blue between the trees. This creates depth between the mountains, the lake, and the snow. Next, we're going in with our darkest green, and we're going to make some shadows. Keep it towards the center of the tree because that's where the shadows would be naturally. While the big trees are drying, take a very muted light green and make some squiggle trees in the center of the blue. Using that same blue, put some random blue patches all over the big trees. Because even though snow is white, snow's shadows are blue. I'm also going to add that blue to the little squiggle trees at the bottom, and completely random is completely fine. And finally, I'm going to add some white on top of those random blue splotches. And that, beautiful people, is a little mini landscape for your Christmas table.
By most traditional standards, this week's efforts may not win any prizes. The soup, or stew, depending on your optimism, was hearty but far from photogenic. The bread was more dense than fluffy, and the bookcases are still a work in progress. So here's the thing I'm learning. Perfection is a measurement, and it depends entirely on what you're measuring. Was the soup delicious, and did it make the house smell wonderful, and did it feed a hungry family? Absolutely. Did the bread pair perfectly with the soup and the stew on a cold evening when everybody was tired? Absolutely. Is working on the bookcases that have been standing for 250 years worth all the time and the effort? Absolutely. I'm having to retrain my brain that the goal isn't to perfect things, it's just to participate in them. And that goes back to creating the gift tags. As we get older, we're less likely to be creative because we think at our age we should be at a certain level. But we're actually at the level that any beginner would be at. We just have to stop being embarrassed of being a beginner. We have to be able to say, well, the goal isn't to make a perfect picture. The goal is to work on our hand and eye coordination and to still our overactive brains by doing something creative. And in that sense, it's perfect. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here, and I hope you get the chance to do something perfectly imperfect today.